What's going on, guys? This is Junior here, and today I'm going to show you how to completely Dockerize a Spring Boot application. Now, this is a very small and simple title, but this course is going to be very loaded because I'm going to show you how to properly work with all your configurations. And what we're going to try to do is to completely containerize the entire application. So in the end, what I would like to have is I can run a single command in the command line, and the entire application will be Dockerized and it will be deployed. And after like a minute or so, I can just go to my browser and then access the application. So with a single command, I want to be able to have the entire application Dockerized. I want the images to be created, and then I want the containers or container to start, and then I can just go to the browser and then interact with the application. So since I'm doing this on my local computer, I'm not going to be deploying the application on the internet. So that's going to be in the next section. But for this section, I'm going to show you how to take the application and then Dockerize it. In the real world, whenever you're going to deploy the application, or at least right now as we speak in 2023, the best option is for you to choose a platform, and then you can host the entire application there, including your database and even configuration. So a proper deployment would be something that you would do in the cloud using possibly AWS, Amazon Web Services. And that's how I'm going to show you how to deploy the application in the next section. Let's say you want to deploy your app, or you just want to learn Docker because you do a lot of work with Docker, and you just want to know how to deploy and Dockerize an application and kind of do it properly. So that's what this course is about. I'm going to show you how to properly take all your configuration. We're not going to leave any sensitive information in any configuration, and then we're going to completely Dockerize the application and even put a wrapper around the Docker command. So instead of running, for example, Docker run and then pass in the name of an image, we're going to actually take this and then wrap it with our own command that we're going to run, and then the entire process will be kicked off. So in the end, if I can bring my terminal here, so I have the front end running, I guess I can just stop it. So I stop it. So in the end, what I want to do, I want to do something like this, like run my app, like that. And then when I press enter, it's just going to run the entire application. So it's going to take it, Dockerize it, create the image, run the image, create the container, and then the application should be live. So I'm going to show you how to do that. And for anything that is sensitive, so for example, our GWT secret, we're not going to have it in the configuration like we do here. Okay, so you can see I have the application running. Like if I go back here, I can try to log in, and then we're going to check out the application. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is my secure password. And then I'm going to go ahead and log in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so I'm inside of the application, and we have a bunch of functionalities. We can work with customers, we can work with invoices, we can create invoice, we can see all of the invoices, we can go to our profile, we can update our information, update our password, update our authorization, we can activate or deactivate or unlock and lock our account. We can also set up multi-factor authentication. We can show all the logs to show where we logged in from. You can see all of this has been on my computer, which is this computer that I'm using right now. So a bunch of other things that you can do in this application. And if you've been following, you know that this is a super loaded application. So we have a lot to take into account whenever we're going to try to deploy the application. So for example, in the back end, we know that when someone creates a new account, we're going to send them an email to verify their account, because by default, their account is going to be disabled. So if I scroll down to the configuration and I go to the first one, for example, the dev one, and you can see that we have a lot of things that we have to account for. We have the secret, we have all of the credentials for the database configuration, and also some other things that we would have here for the email. So we wouldn't put this in the clear. And you'll probably find other material where they're showing you how to Dockerize a Spring Boot application, but they also leave all of these passwords and username in the clear. And that's not usually how it's done. I mean, it's never done like this in the real world. So I'm going to show you how to make sure that we pass in our own secret and we don't pass it in the clear. Also pass in all of our credentials in our database. All of this is going to be passed in as we run the application. So we're not going to have anything in clear text like this. So the first thing that I'm going to say is we're going to completely redesign the way that we're working with these configurations. As of right now, what we have is this right here that is just pointing to the active profile. And by default, which is something that we did a few lectures before, if you scroll down, you'll see that in our profiles configuration, so this part of the POM file right here, we have the dev, and then we have the prod, and then we activate the dev by default. So you see active by default is set to true. So that means that when we have this and we run the application, it's gonna look at this, it's gonna see whatever profile is active, that's the one that I'm gonna be using, and it's gonna see that by default we're activating the dev, and it's gonna go and look for this particular file. So it's gonna look for this application-dev.yaml or .properties file, and it's gonna load all of these properties in our beans and make sure they're available to be used. So that's how it is now, and we're gonna completely redesign this because there's like a much better way that we can do this that is even more secure and that is mostly used. So that's the first thing that we're gonna be doing. And again, this application, there's a lot going on in it. We're gonna try to see if we can containerize it and then deploy it on our computer or on some local computer. And if you want to deploy it in the cloud, you can do that as well. So you can get an EC2 instance or some other server from some other server provider or cloud provider service, and then just create a computer there, like in the cloud. You can give it an IP address and things like that. They usually come with a public IP. All you'll have to do is to just install Docker and then just run the same command that you're gonna. Okay. But now I'm going to show you how to take this configuration that, I mean, most people are familiar with this. We're going to take that configuration to the next level. So that's what we're going to be doing next. So the first thing that we're gonna have to do is to update the way that we have our configuration right now. And the reason that we're doing this is because we want our configuration to be a lot more flexible so that it's easier for us to pass in environment variable, sensitive information that we don't want to put in a configuration file. So let's open up the configuration the way that we have it. And you remember in the beginning, I showed you how to set this up so that we can have different properties files and then we can read them inside of the main properties file right here, right? So we can just pass this string in, and then inside of the POM file, if you scroll down, we can specify that we want the dev to be active by default. So that was all good, but now it's time to take things over to the next level. So what we're going to do, or what I'm going to do, is to go inside of the dev, and then I'm just gonna copy everything that I have in the dev, and then I'm gonna go inside of the main one. I'm gonna get rid of this profile active and then paste it in there. Okay, so everything that I had inside of the dev, you can see here, just copied everything and then I put it inside of the main application properties. And then I'm gonna close and scroll up a little more. So now what we're going to do is to make all these things, like all of these values, environment variables, right? So the first one is going to be the secret. So for the secret, I'm gonna say $, open and close curly braces, and I'm just gonna name it JWT_secret. Okay, so now it becomes a true environment variable that we can pass in either in IntelliJ or in the command line, or we can even have it in the system, like the computer that the application is running on. And Spring will look in a certain order for this particular environment variable, and then it's gonna pass it in here. So what we're going to do is we're gonna update all of this information that we have here to use environment variables. So I'm gonna copy this syntax and then I'm gonna scroll down, and you can do that for whatever you want. Say for example, if you wanted to use a different database, for example, like if you wanted to use Postgre, you can even make this part of the URL an environment variable so that you can pass Postgre if you wanted to. So that's really up to you. So here I'm gonna pass in, instead of this hard-coded string, I'm gonna pass in this, and then I'm gonna say this is going to be the MySQL host. So I'm gonna say MySQL_host. Okay, this name is completely up to you. You can make it whatever you like, and then I'm gonna copy it, gonna pass it for the port. Remember, we're keeping the colon, we're just changing whatever the variable we want to change to. So we're gonna change this to port. Oops. So that's going to be port. Oops. So port, and then the database name. In this case, that's going to be let's just name this database. So database. Okay, so whatever we pass in for these values for these environment variables, then they're gonna be plugged in. And of course, we're gonna do the same for this. So this is going to be the username. So I'm gonna say username, and then we're gonna do the same for the password. Well, this was the username. So cut, paste, and then gonna change this to password. So you can see now we don't have anything hard-coded, and now we can pass all of these as environment variable, and we don't have to store anything in clear text anywhere in any configuration. That also means the application is now broken, and I'm gonna show you how we're gonna resolve it. So if you scroll down, you can see that we have a bunch of key value pairs that we have down here, and you can make all of it environment variable if you want to. Okay, there's no limit. You can make everything environment variable if you wanted to, if it makes sense for your application. And then I'm gonna scroll down and I'm gonna do the same for the email. So you can see here we have the mail information. So I'm gonna change this as well. So I'm gonna change this to, email underscore host, because that's gonna be the host. And then I'm gonna change this to be the port. So I'm gonna change this to port, change this to the email, and this is gonna be the password. So this is going to be the email, we can say ID, and then this is going to be the email password. And like I said, you can make everything else an environment variable if you want, as long as it makes sense for what you're trying to do. But as for me, that's going to be all that I'm going to do for the email. But if you want to make some of these other properties environment variable because you feel like you might want to change them, then feel free to do that. And then I'm going to scroll up a little more. I think I want to change the server port. So here we have the server. So I'm going to go down and then I'm going to say port, lowercase port, and I want to make this the container port. So wherever the container is running, that's going to be the port. So whatever port that I have on the container, it's going to be the same. So I'm going to paste that again, and then I'm going to change this to be container. So container underscore port. Also, another thing you can do, you can put a colon and then you can put a default. So I'm going to put 8080, which means that whenever the application is going to start, Spring is going to try to find this environment variable somewhere. And if it can't find it, then it's going to use 8080 as the default. Okay, so that's like a fallback that you can pass in. And you can do this pretty much anywhere. Like you can say you can pass this database, and then you can pass in some other database, like my default, database or DB. Okay, so I'm just not going to do that for this. But I do want to do it for the port. So we're going to keep the default port, which is 8080, if this is not passed. When Spring is going to try to find this container port environment variable and it can't find it, then it'll just use 8080. And then the other thing that I want to do, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this. The other thing that I want to do is to pass in profiles, and then I want to pass active. Okay, so we're gonna pass in the active profile this way now, and then we're gonna make it an environment variable as well. So I'm gonna say change this to the active profile. So active underscore profile. So whatever profile is active is gonna be stored inside of this active profile variable or environment variable, and then it's gonna be picked up here. And again, if we want, we can just say dev. Okay, so by default it will use dev if you cannot find an environment variable that is passed into this placeholder, which is the active profile. And then a custom one that I want to pass, if I can collapse all the Spring ones, and I'm gonna go below here, and then I'm gonna call it, let's say UI, and then app, and then URL. So that's going to be the URL that we need to pass into the application whenever we need to access the UI app URL, which is going to be changing a lot. So here we can say UI underscore app underscore URL. So then we can make this an environment variable. So in our case, the UI app URL is localhost 4200 when we're running it locally. And this is something that we need to get a hold of because we're gonna need to access this so that we can generate the URLs. Like when a user sign up, we need to send them an email with a link so they can click on it. Remember, this link is pointing to the front end, so we can pass this in and then read it in the application. So let me show you where this is gonna come really handy. Is if you go inside of the resource, repository, not resource, and then you go inside of the user repository, and remember we're getting the verification URL. Well, oops, I'm already at the bottom. So you see here we're passing in the backend applications. Okay, so this is gonna give you the backend URL, but that's not what we want because this application is an API. We're not going to send them a link to a backend application. They need to see a front-end application. So we will be passing in this UI app URL, which is a simple configuration property. We'll be passing it in to this class so that we can use it down here whenever we're going to create these URLs, because we cannot keep doing this with the backend. It has to be a front end. Okay, so that's where it's going to come handy, and you're going to see all of that in action. And then the last thing I want to pass is for the email. So if I go down to the email, I'm going to create another custom property. I'm going to put it under properties. I'm going to call it verify, and then I'm going to say host. So that's going to be the host, like the email host. And I'm going to also pass this in as the verify underscore email underscore host. Okay, so we have to define now all of these environment variables so that the application doesn't break. If I run it now, it will break because we don't have any of these environments to define. Okay, so it's gonna look for these guys, it's not gonna find them, and it's gonna break. So what we're going to do is to create different environments where we're gonna set different values for these environment variables. Maybe this is not making sense right now, but once I start putting this together, then it's gonna make total sense to you. Okay, so this is all of the environment variable that I need that I'm gonna define. So now the next thing we have to do is to define these environment variables so that the application can find them whenever we try to run it. So let's go ahead and do that next. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna open the dev, because remember, this is gonna be where we're gonna define what these values are supposed to be depending on the environment. And I'm gonna drag it over here so that I can have both of them open at the same time. And then we're gonna define all of these environment variables inside of this dev file. So I'm gonna scroll down and push these down because I'm gonna need the values for this. Okay, I'm not gonna be using this again because we're not gonna redefining those environment variables again. We just need to set the values for these environment variables. Okay. So first I'm gonna define a comment at the top, and I'm gonna say this is going to be for database. So I'm gonna say database. Okay. And then what we want for the database is we want the username. So we're gonna pass in the MySQL username. We're just gonna pass it in plain like that. So we're gonna say, we're gonna say username, and we're gonna put a colon, and then we're gonna give the value, and then we're gonna pass in the password. I don't know why it's adding this space in the beginning, and let's pass in the host. So pass in the host, we're gonna pass in the port, copy that and place it over here. And then we're gonna pass in the database. So copy that as well and place it in here. And then I'm gonna remove all these spaces. So remove, and then we're gonna define the values. So I'm gonna put the colon for all of them. Okay, so what are these values going to be? So these are going to be the values that we already had for the dev. So if I scroll over here, remember this is the dev file. We had these values for the dev file. So I can just copy the host and then paste it here. I can also copy the database name, paste it here, and then also get the port. So that's the default port. We're going to paste it here. Okay, so you see now I have the same thing in the dev environment, but now their environment variable, I make the entire thing more flexible. And then we're gonna have let me in for the password. I obviously never use this password, but we're still in dev environment, so that's okay. Control Z space and then pass it through. Okay, so you can see now whenever the application runs, since we specify over here on line 13 that the default is going to be dev, so Spring is going to read these values from this file. Okay, so that's what it's gonna do. And then I'm gonna I guess I can get rid of all of this. I'm gonna add another comment, and then I'm gonna say server config, and these are gonna be like server related. So this is going to be the container port, so I can copy that and then paste it here. Also I can copy the profile, so copy that and then paste it here, and make sure I remove the space in the beginning. Okay, so the container port, we can make it 8085 if we want, and then we can make this one the dev. Okay, we already say it's the default. As you can see here, we say the default is dev, but we're also passing in the value for this active profile. So even if we didn't have dev here, since we specify in the POM file that the dev is going to be the active, then it's going to pick this properties file. And then I'm going to get rid of all of this because we don't need this anymore. It's already defined in here. As you can see, it's already defined. We just need to pass in these environment variables. So I'm going to scroll down, and I think I can remove everything actually. Delete everything. Well, maybe not. Let me go back. Okay, so this is going to be SMTP. Okay, so let's just define everything and then I can delete them. And then I want the email configuration. So we're going to say email config uppercase C. So this is going to be, if I scroll down on the left, it's going to be the host, the port. See if I can just copy all of this stuff here just to leverage some code, and then paste it, and then get rid of all this. So delete, and then delete all of this stuff. Okay, delete, and delete. Okay, so now we need to pass in the host for the email, which we already have at the bottom, which is going to be this. I'll paste that up here. The port is what we have, 587. So we're gonna say the port 587, and then we have the ID. Well, that's gonna be your email ID, so I'm gonna put the placeholders there. So I'm gonna say the email ID, remember to change it. We're gonna do the same with the password, copy that and then place it here. And we also need the UI app URL. I'm gonna put this somewhere here, put some more space here, and I think at this point then I can delete all of this stuff. Okay, so we don't need that anymore. All right, And then the UI app URL, remember we have http://localhost 4200 for now. This is going to be the UI app URL. Okay, so that's the one that we're using in dev because we're still in dev. Remember, this is dev environment, and you can see the file name is application-dev. And for the email host, I can do the same. So I can pass this in, and then we can pass in the server port. So instead of 4200, which is still going to be localhost, but the port is coming from whatever port that we have for the application whenever it's running. So we can pass in this value in here. Okay, so whatever the container port here, so whatever we pass in to be the container port, which in this case is going to be the server port for the app. So the port where the app is going to run, that's going to be the email host. Okay. And then lastly, we need to pass in this JWT. So I'm going to temporarily pass this JWT down here. And then I'm going to say my secure secret. I think that's what I had before. But anyways, all right. So now we're done with this configuration. So if you run the application now, it's not going to break because Spring is going to read these values that we're setting here from this file as it's running on the default dev profile. Okay, so just to show you that, I'm gonna go ahead and run it right now. I think we have everything covered. So if I run it, just give it a second to start, and let's make sure we're in dev. So if I scroll up here, you can see it says the following one profile is active, which is the dev profile. If I scroll down, you can see we're running on 8085 because we specify 8085 here. So if we get rid of this container port and then we try to run it again, remember we said the container port, if it exists, use it or use 8080. So now if I rerun it, you will see that it will pick 8080. Let's give it a second, and if you scroll up or scroll down, actually, you can see now it's 8080. Okay, so let's do Control Z on that and put that back. So we can control where the port of the application is by just passing in a value for this environment variable, which is super convenient because now this is like very flexible and we can pass this in whenever we want. Another thing you can do, if I were to comment these two out, if I try to run it now, well, let me just let you see what's going to happen. So we don't have the default profile, so it's going to choose dev by default. So it's going to pick this file, and we don't have the container port, and it's going to choose 8080. So if I scroll down, you can see it's running on 8080. And if I scroll up, you can see it picks dev. But say I wanted to run it on a different port. So I'm going to copy the container port and I'm going to go to edit configuration. Okay. So I'm just showing you something that you can do just to show you how flexible this is. And you can say I have the dev as the default. That's okay. And this is also only for running the application. Like say you're a developer and you're working with IntelliJ and you're running the application, then you can pass in some environment variable here if they're sensitive and you don't want to put them in a configuration file. But this only applies to this IDE. So I'm just showing you that because we have an environment variable, we can pass it in as an environment variable in the IDE itself. So I'm going to go ahead and expand this a little more and put it a little bit in the middle. And then I'm going to click on environment variables. So this one right here under operating system. You can see now it gives me this environment variable, and then I can say, well, let me close this. We're doing the container port. We can do anything though. I'm just showing you an example with the container port. So we're gonna do edit configuration, and then we're gonna do environment variable, and then I'm gonna pass container port. Let's set it to 9000. Okay, just so that we can see something different. So I'm gonna pass container port and then 9000, and you can see you separate them with a semicolon, and then you keep putting more. So if you want to put more, and then you click apply and click OK. And now let's go ahead and rerun. Just give it a second to start, and let's see what port we have now. So if we scroll down, you can see now we have 9000. Okay, so I just wanted to show you how flexible this can be. So if you're a developer, you wanna, you have something that's sensitive that you don't wanna put in a properties file for whatever reason, then since this is an environment variable, then you can pass it in here as well. Okay, so you can just pass it in the configuration. So I'm gonna delete that and then click apply and click OK. And then I'm gonna uncomment these two environment variables. So what we're going to do next is to do the same thing for the prod and the test. Okay, so all we'll have to do is to just copy all of these properties and then put them in the appropriate file. So I'm going to copy everything inside of the dev, close it, and let's go back to our environments and click on this little aiming icon, I guess. And then we're going to go to the, well, we already did the dev. So for the prod, we can just paste everything. Okay. And then we can just change this to be prod. And also you would change all of these values to point to the prod environment. Okay. So for example, if this would be a different URL, then you would pass this different URL for prod there. If you have a container port or a server port, in this case, that would be the server port. For the prod, that would be different. Then you would pass this there, etc. And if you want, I can just copy this and paste it again, and then we can do a test, because there's usually like a test environment. So now we have this test environment, and then I'm just gonna change the profile to be test. But in your case, you would change all of these database information, the port information, and then change this, possibly change this, and also change the secret, maybe change the URL to point to something else. But again, this is just an example. But in your case, you would have to change those values to point to something that is related to that particular environment, that particular test environment. So that's the first thing that we're going to do, because we're going to need to pass some of these informations to Docker so that Docker can replace those values for us. So that's the reason we're doing this. But like I just showed you, you can pass them in the IDE because they're environment variable, and you can pass them in. If I open a terminal here, let me select git bash and say you wanted to, like, wherever the application is going to be deployed, it's going to run some command, and you want to pass these environment variables as command. So if you want to run the application with Maven, you would say mvn spring-boot and then run. So if I do that and just run it, it will run the application by choosing the dev environment because it's the default. So let's just give it a second here, and you can see it's starting it, and it's starting, and you can see it started on 8085 because this is what we have. Well, let me close this. That's what we have in the dev. You can see 8085, okay? And if we scroll up, it will tell us that the dev profile was selected. You can see right here, the following one profile was active. But say we wanted to change that when we run it on the command. And then in the beginning, I would pass in the environment variable that I want. And this case, that's the container underscore port. And then we're gonna set this, say, to 4000. Okay, so we set it to 4000, and then we run whatever command that we're running to launch the application. So if I press enter on that, you'll see that the application will run on 4000 because we're overriding the environment variable here. So we're still choosing the dev, but this particular container port now is overridden because the command line takes priority over this file right here. So if I scroll up, you'll see that, if I can find it, you can see here we're using the following profile, which is the dev, but if I scroll down, you'll see that the application is not running on 4000 because that's what we pass in the command line. So this is just me giving you an example on how flexible then your application become when you have things set up in the way that I'm just showing you right now as environment variable. So now what we're going to do, since our application is now very flexible when it comes to the configuration, we're going to try to Dockerize the application. So we're going to have to create a Docker file so that we can create an image out of this application. And then off of this image, we're going to see if we can run a container. Now, another thing is I'm not really talking a lot about Docker and what Docker is and how to use Docker. So I'm expecting you to have some base knowledge or to be familiar with Docker. So if you're not familiar with Docker, like at all, so I would highly encourage you to maybe take some courses on YouTube for free on Docker, just to know what it is and how it works. But Docker is like running most applications that you're interacting with on a daily basis. They might have wrappers around Docker. For example, if you're familiar with AWS, then you have ECS, which is a Elastic Container Service. That's a wrapper around container. But that's a different topic. I don't want to confuse anyone watching these lectures. But if you don't have a lot of experience with Docker, then now is a good time to not move forward with the rest of this and then learn Docker, like learn the basic concepts of Docker. And then when you come back and watch these lectures, then it's going to make a lot more sense, because if I'm showing you how to deploy things on Docker, that also means that you should have some base knowledge of Docker. Okay, so what we're going to be doing next is to try to Dockerize the application. The first step is to create a Dockerfile and then see if we can create an image out of the entire application. So we're going to create an image that we can run as a container for this particular application. And then we're going to see if we can run this container. So that's what we're going to be doing next. So the Dockerfile is just going to be about 10 or 12 lines of code, and it's going to be super powerful because it's going to allow us to create an image for this application. And I'm going to walk you through this step by step. So I'm going to close everything that I have open, and then I'm going to squeeze this in a little more. So what we want to do is to just, didn't mean to do that. So I want to go to the root folder. So the folder where you have all of your files and other folders, and I want to right click here. I want to say new, and then I'm going to create a new. And this file has to be named Dockerfile, just like that, without any extension. And then I'm going to press enter. So the first thing we need to do is we need to have a base image. So the image off of which we're going to base our image. In our case, we just need the JDK because we need the Java runtime and the compiler. But what I'm going to do is to have this in two phases. So the first phase is going to be to create a jar file, which we can do with Maven. And then the second phase is to actually copy the jar file and then get OpenJDK and then run the jar file, because by this point then we will have our environment and then we just need to get the jar file and then we can run the jar file. So what I'm going to do is to get Maven. So for the first stage, Maven is going to be our base image. So I'm going to say from, which is a keyword. Then I'm going to say Maven, and I have to specify the version. The latest version, when I check today, which is July 20th, 2023, the latest version is 3.9. So 3.9 I think it's 0.3. Okay, so that's the latest version as of right now. So 3.9.3. So I'm going to select that. And then I'm going to give this an alias. So I'm going to name it build. Okay, so we're going to refer to this build later so that we can copy the jar file that is going to be the result of the first phase. So we're technically saying download Maven, we need to have Maven. And then the next thing I want to do is to create a working directory. So we're going to say work dir. This is not required, but I like to know exactly where my application is and where it's running so that when I access the container, then I know exactly where to look for. Then I know exactly where to go. So in this case, I'm going to say / and then I'm just going to name it app. Okay, so we're going to create a folder. We're going to name it app, and that's where we're going to put all of our files. And I'm going to go down and then I'm going to create a variable. To create a variable, you do arg. So this is an argument or a variable, and this is going to be named the container underscore port, because I want to control the container port from the outside of the running container, meaning I can pass it as an environment variable. So that's what I'm describing here. And you're going to see how we're going to work with this later. And to be completely honest, you have to have a basic understanding of Docker. Otherwise, none of this is going to make sense, even though I'm really trying to explain it in the best possible way. So the argument is going to be like some kind of an environment variable that we can pass so that it can be dynamic, because we don't want to hard code it, because we need to match it with what's running on the computer and then what we're passing and in some other configuration. So that's why I'm defining it as an environment variable. So I get Maven, line 1, line 2, I create a directory or a folder called app, and then on line 3 I define an environment variable called container. On line 4, what I'm going to do is to copy the POM file. So I'm going to say copy the pom.xml file, and we want to copy it into app. So I'm going to say / app. Oops, like that. Okay, so we say copy the POM file, only the POM file, and then move it into the app folder. And then what I'm gonna do is to say run a Maven command. So we're gonna say mvn dependency, so dependency resolve. So this is gonna download and get all of the dependencies on this particular Docker container, which is gonna be like a temporary container. So it's just gonna run this command, reach out to the internet, get all of the jars that we need to build the application, because the POM file have a list of all the dependencies that we need. So we're just going to get these dependencies so that we can build the application. And then the next thing I want to do is to copy everything else. And to do this, I do a dot, and then I want to copy everything else again into the app folder. Now you can see on line 4, I copied the POM file, and then on line 6 later, I copied everything else. The reason this is a good practice is because you can break down your Dockerfile in different stages or in different steps. That way it becomes more performant, because whenever you're gonna repeat the same command again to create an image out of this Docker file or this Docker image that's gonna be created, then a step 1 is already done, then it's gonna skip it and not do it again because you already did it. So that's why it's good to have things done in different steps, so that if you already did another step and you make a small change that doesn't require you to, get Maven again or something like that, then it's not going to run all these steps. It's just going to skip them, and it's going to show you a log that it's not doing these steps because they've already been done. So that's why it's good to dissect this in different steps. So we're going to copy everything else into that same folder. And then at this point, then we're going to run the Maven clean. So we're going to say mvn clean, because we want to clean everything, remove the target folder. And the next thing we want to do is to run mvn package, because we want to create a jar file. But then we also want to say we want to skip the test. So we're gonna say skip test, and then we're gonna do dash and then X. This is gonna make sure that we get extra logs with Maven. The X is just a flag, and then the D skip test is just gonna skip all the tests, because we don't want to run the test when we're just creating the jar file. So after line 8 is complete, we will have a jar file for our application that is going to live inside of a target folder. Because whenever we build the application, if I can show you real quick, we have this jar file that is created inside of this folder. So if I run the application, you will see that it will get created here, like the jar file. And I can probably show you that a little later, or I can just run it right now and then continue with what I'm doing, making sure that this doesn't distract you. So I'm gonna move this down, but you'll see it in a minute. And then I'm gonna go down. So this is the first step, everything from line 1 to line 8. That's step 1. And this is called a multi-stage Dockerfile because you have different stages, different things happening. And then from now, after we have the jar file, I'm going to say, now give me open. So we're going to say open JDK, that one right here. And as of right now, I think the latest version is 20. Okay, so we're going to get the latest version of the open JDK. And then we want to copy that jar file. So to do this, we're going to say copy. We want to say dash and then from. And then we're passing in the placeholder that we defined for the first step. Remember on line 1, we define it as build. So we're gonna say we're gonna copy from the first step, which we name as build. And what we're copying is located inside of the app/target. And then it's gonna be a jar file and it's gonna have some weird name. We can define what the name is going to be in the POM file, but we don't have to do that. We can just say *.jar because we know there's just going to be only one jar file. And then as we copy, we can also give it a name. So in this case, I'm going to name it app.jar. Okay, so far so good. And then we're going to expose this container port. And to do this, you can do $ and then pass in container port. So we're going to say container_port, or you can put it inside open and closing curly braces. So either way I think would work, just like that. Okay, so we're referencing the container port that we're going to be passing in dynamically as the port to expose from inside of the container. And then we have to tell it which command to run to start our application. And this takes an array of commands. So here I'm going to say we want to run java -jar. So we're going to say -jar. And then the last one is the name of the jar file. So in this case, that's app.jar. So hopefully this is coming together. We have a multi-stage Dockerfile. So in the first stage, we get Maven because we need to run these Maven commands like this one and this one and this one. So we say, okay, give me Maven, just download this version of Maven from the internet and then name this first stage as build. Okay, so that's what this as build is doing. And then we say create a folder called app because we want to locate everything in one place, which is more organized. And then we say, and also define this environment variable, which is container port. And then we say, copy the POM file inside of this app folder that we just defined. And then we say, since we have Maven, that means we can run this Maven command. So we're going to say, run this command, Maven dependency resolve, which is going to get all of our dependencies. And Maven is just going to read the POM file, see all of the dependencies, and then download them on this machine, which is a temporary machine. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but it's just going to download them and make sure they're available for whenever we run these commands. Okay, so and then we say copy everything else with the dot into that folder now, and then run this Maven clean, which is going to remove the target folder. And then we say after that, just run this Maven package and then skip the test, and then -x to give us extra logs because we want to see all the logs. And the reason I like to pass this X is because the only thing that you're going to have when we're going to run or try to run a container out of this image that we're going to create using this template, you can call it, because we will only see logs coming in the terminal. So we need to have as many logs as possible. So we're passing in this extra flag here so we can have as many logs as possible. So after this is complete, we're going to have a jar file inside of the target folder the same way that we should have now. If I can maybe reload this. Well, I'm not seeing the jar file, but you can see that all of our classes have been compiled. I think if I run this command in the command line, if I stop this real quick and open the terminal, and I'm going to select git bash. You can use this regular Windows terminal. So the command line, that should be fine too. I just prefer to use git bash. But if I run this command, which is the Maven package right here, I can just copy it from here. And then whenever this is ready, I'm just going to paste it here. And you're going to see that it's going to generate the jar file for us. So that's what's going to happen when we run number 8 here. Okay, so if I paste this in here, paste. So I'm just gonna run it. Okay, so that's gonna be our Dockerfile that we're gonna need to create. And that's just gonna generate the template that we can use to run containers. Okay, so you can see that we have built success. And you can see here, we have the secure copy -0010-001 snapshot.jar. Okay, so this is the jar file that we're gonna be copying from here. Okay, so you can see it's inside of the target folder and it's only one jar file. Again, you can change the name, like you can determine what this name is going to be. It's a simple configuration in the POM file. I just don't remember it off the top of my head just right now. Make sure that you have that particular name that you want here every single time. Okay, so this is what's going to happen, and we're just going to need that one jar file to run the application. And I'm going to also show you that. So if I do cd into target at the bottom here and clean this and I do ls, you can see that we have this jar file right here. So I can copy it, and then I can say java-jar and then pass in the name of the jar that we just copied, if it's going to allow me to paste. So like this. Make sure I remove this space. So if I do this, it will run the application. Well, let me see. Okay, I have a problem here because the Java version that I have and the way that I compile it, because in the jar we have, well, not in the jar, in the POM file, we have Java version 18, but I think I have a higher version on my computer. And because I'm using this command line, it's using the one on my computer. So that it has a mismatch because the way that the files have been compiled with the particular version is not the same version, but you get the idea. And also, since we have this issue here, and well, it's not an issue, but I'm just explaining. So we can also update this to 20 because remember, I'm gonna copy this and paste it to 20. So we're upgrading to the latest version of Java. Okay, we're gonna say this is the version that we're compiling to, as you can see here, and then this is the version of Java that we're using, so that it can match this version right here. Okay, so 20 that we're gonna install whenever we're gonna run that jar. We also need to tell it that we're targeting this 20 here because when we run this command, we need to let Maven know which version of Java that we're using. So hopefully this is all making sense and we should be ready to go. Now, the next thing we have to do is to create a Docker Compose file, which will allow us to run containers off of this image a little easier. So that's what we're gonna be working on next. I'm gonna go ahead again and right click and then create another file. So I'm gonna name this docker-compose.yaml. That's gonna be a YAML file, and then I'm gonna press enter. So this one is gonna be pretty simple. So all you have to do is to define a number of services. So I'm gonna say services, and then I'm gonna come up with a name for the service. In this case, I'm gonna say secure beta. So the service is gonna be just the name of our application. And then after that, I'm gonna define the container name. So whenever the container starts, what am I gonna name it? So I'm gonna say secure beta container. Okay, you can come up with whatever name you like. And then I'm gonna say to do this, we need to build the image, which is coming off of the Dockerfile. The Dockerfile is like a template to create image and then run these images as containers. So an image is a template to run containers. A running image or an instance of a running image is a container. So for the build, we're gonna tell it the context, which is literally the path, I guess you can say, of the Docker file. We're gonna put a dot to indicate the current folder, and then we're gonna pass in the argument. So the argument in this case is gonna be the container port. So here we're gonna say the argument name is container port. So we're gonna say container. This is what we made up inside of the Docker file. So it's gonna be container port, but we need to give it a value as well. So the value is going to come from the outside. So we're going to say then that's going to be container port again. So let's just copy this real quick and then paste it. So what we're technically saying is there's an argument whenever you're going to build this Docker file, because we define it right here. We can see arg, oops, Control Z. Let me see if I can just put them side by side. I'm going to put this on the right here. So we're saying we're going to run containers using this Docker Compose file. We're going to name it this, right? And then we're going to say to run this container, we need to build this image coming from this Docker file. And then we say, hey, it's in the same directory. And then we're also saying there's an argument named container port. So this first one on the left is referring to this. So we say the argument is container port, but we're going to be passing in this container port dynamically as an environment variable to this Docker Compose file, which is why we just put it in curly braces and a $sign in front of it. And then after that, we have to tell it the name of the image. So under build, we're going to say image, and then the image is going to be secure beta, and then we're going to say version 1. Okay, so you usually give an image a tag. The most common tag is going to be the latest, because when you have automated system and CDCI pipeline, then whenever you're building an image, like you can have a trigger that's going to happen whenever you push some code and the code is built and it builds the image. So some of these services, they're looking for the image name with the tag of latest, because you always want to get the latest. But that's irrelevant in our case. But just know that there is something called a tag for an image, and it's important. And then after that, I'm going to say restart. Unless the container stop, we're going to restart it, so that if it stop, then it will just restart by itself. And then we're going to pass in an environment file. So we're going to say environment file, and this is an array, which is why we have the little dash in the beginning. And the environment file is also going to be something that we're going to pass in dynamically. So I'm going to put a $, open curly braces, and then I'm going to name it env_file. So this is also going to be dynamic, and you're going to see how this is going to make sense. And I'm going to go down, and then I'm going to go back and then say expose, because we want to expose the port. In this case, we're exposing that same container port. So I'm going to copy this and then paste it here. And you can see the dash in the beginning, which means it's an array in a YAML world, which means I can pass more than just one value. And then we're going to pass in the port. So we're going to say port, and this is also going to be the same thing. So I'm going to copy this container port, which is going to be inside of the container. And then I want to map it to the host port. So the host port also is going to be the host port on the computer where the Docker is running. So we're going to say host port. So that's the port of the computer, because whenever we do all of this work, it's going to happen on a specific computer. So which port from the running container we want to expose to the host port, because otherwise we will not be able to access the running container, even though it's running fine, because we need a way to go from out inside of the container to the outside world. And that's going to be done via the host computer, which is the computer where this entire thing is running. So maybe this is not making sense now, but it's going to make sense a little bit more later. Okay, so pretty simple stuff. And hopefully, like I said, my expectation, my assumption is that you guys are familiar with Docker, but that's all we're doing here. So container name, the service name, we made that up. And then container name, the build, how we gonna be building the image for this container. Well, we're saying we're building it ourselves because we have our Dockerfile. We're saying it's in the same folder or at the same level. And then we're passing in this argument because this needs it, because that's what we're going to expose from inside the container. And the same one that you can see here from inside the container, we're exposing the same one. Okay, so we're going to expose it and then also map it to a host port, which is going to be different, or it can be the same. And then we're passing in a name for the image. We say if it's stopped, restart it. And then we're going to passing in an environment file. The environment file is where we're going to have all of the environment variables that we define in the application.properties file. So remember, we have all of these files where we have to pass in a bunch of information. So if I close this off, so we need to pass in all of this, otherwise the application will not run because it needs all of this information. So we need to have a way to pass all of this information into the Docker Compose file, and that's going to be in this environment file here. So that's all we have to do for the Docker Compose file. And even though you see that these are like a few lines of code, these are like super powerful configuration, and you're going to see these in action in a second. So the next thing that we're going to do, we're going to create an environment file that we can use to pass in the container port and also the host port. So these two environment variables that you see here. And then we're going to define one for each of the environments. So we're going to have one for dev, one for prod, and one for test. And then we can just run one command and it's going to start this entire process. And you will see that we'll just wait and watch all the logs go through, and then the application will just be live. So that's what we're going to be working on next. So again, I'm going to right click and then do new, and then we're going to create a simple file. In this case, we're going to call it .env, lowercase env. And then I'm going to make more room and also close the POM file, also close this because I want you to see exactly what I'm doing. So I'm going to move this over to the right so that you can see the mirroring that I'm doing. So the first thing we need to define is this container port. So I'm going to copy that, paste it here, and then put an equal sign, and then I'm going to define it as 8,000. Okay, so that's going to be the container port, which is going to be passed into the image, because remember, we're defining this argument inside of the Docker file. So that's going to make sure that the container port is exposed whenever we start the container, which is also happening here, but just to be safe, because if you don't define it in the Docker file, but you define this here, then it's pretty much doing the same thing. But just to be safe, I'm just going to define the same value for both of them, both inside of the Docker Compose and also inside of the Docker file. And then we also have to define this host. So this host right here, I'm gonna copy it, go on the second line. The host port is going to be the same one. You can do a different port, you can do the same port, doesn't really matter. And if you guys want to see this, maybe when I run this, you can see it later, because I don't want to confuse you. This can be really confusing, and I'm trying to, go slow because I don't want to confuse you guys. But after we run it on 8,000, then we're gonna change the host port, and you're going to see the difference because the host port is different from the container port. So that's all we have to do for this .env file. And what's going to happen is whenever we run the command to run this Docker Compose, which is going to access our Docker file and then build the image and then start the container, by default, it's going to be looking for this .env file. And the reason it's important that we pass in these two values inside of this .env file, that the Docker compose command will just look for by default is because we need to provide the container port and also the host port. And this is also very different from this environment file that we're going to pass in here. This is something that's going to be used when we're launching the container. But to build the image, we need to pass this in as soon as we start building this image right here. So that's why it's a little bit different. So now the next thing we have to provide is this environment file. Okay, which is a placeholder. So this is going to be a name that's going to point to a particular. And the reason that I'm doing this is because we need to pass in a different file depending on which environment we want to run the application on. Whether it's dev, prod, or test, or whatever else that you created, we want to be able to control that. So that's why I'm defining all these things as environment variables. Otherwise, it's going to be really hard to like pass in information inside of the container at runtime, at least, unless you want to hard code the values, which we don't want it. Okay, so next we need to create these environment files, which is again a placeholder for this environment file, which is going to point to a specific environment file. In this case, that's going to be a dev or a prod or a test, which defines everything that we have here for the configuration. So let's go ahead and work on that next. So again, I'm going to go up, right click, and new, and then I'm going to do another file. This environment file, which is this one on the right here that we're defining now, you can name it any. In my case, I'm going to name it .env.dev. Okay, so this is going to represent the dev environment file. So this is the environment file that I'm going to pass in whenever I'm going to run this Docker command in case I want to run it for the dev environment. Okay, so that's why I named it .env.dev. So now I'm going to close some of these, close all these because we want to make room. So now I need to pass in all of these values that I have defined here. So I can literally just copy everything that I have here and then go here and then paste. Okay, so the first one that I'm going to need is for the profile. So I'm going to just cut this off and then I'm going to paste it here, put this down. So I'm going to place this at the very top, and the active profile is going to be the dev. Okay, so the same one, but instead of a colon, this is a properties file, so we need to put equal. So the active profile for the dev file, so .env.dev, is going to be dev. Okay, making sense. And also I'm going to keep a comment at the very top, just going to paste it here, and then we're going to change this to profile. Okay, so for the profile, we're going to pass in the dev because we need this for this right here. We're going to override it. Okay, it's already defined here, but this is hard coded. We want to be able to pass these things dynamic. And I'm going to show you how we're going to do this for the secret. Okay, because if I have to do it for all of this, then it's just going to take me a lot more time. However, this is what you would exactly do in a production environment, because you would never have anything hanging around like this, which is credentials. We would never do that. So I'm going to use this right here, this JWT secret, as an example, because it's like one of the most sensitive things that we have in here. Okay, everything else I'm going to leave, but it's going to make a lot more sense. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do Control R. So Control R, because everything is going to be the same. I just have to change the colon to something else. So I'm going to do Control R, and it's going to bring this, and I'm going to say look for every colon. Okay, you can see they're all highlighted, and then I want to change it to equal sign. And also I can do colon and a space so that I can get rid of the space after the colon, because I don't need the space of the equal sign. And I can see everything is highlighted, and that's everything I want to change. And I'm going to click replace all. Okay, so now you can see everything is replaced, and then I can close this off. Okay, now remember, I'm telling you that we're going to pass this in dynamically, but we see my secret is still here. We don't want to do that. What we want to do again is to do $ open and close curly braces, and I'm just going to name this secret. So that means whenever we're going to run the command to run this entire process, we need to pass in this secret because it's not hard coded. And again, that's what you would do for everything that you have on here. Okay, maybe not the profile because you already defined this file as the dev for the environment, but all of these would be passing like this. You put a $ open curly braces, secret, and then close curly braces. That means it's an environment variable. This is also an environment variable. Everything on the left is an environment variable, and we're assigning them values, as you can see here. But again, because we want to make sure that this is not hanging out like this because it's sensitive, we define it again as another environment variable because we want to be able to pass it as we're going to run the command to run this, or we can set it on the host computer. We define this as an environment variable on the host computer. It will be picked up as well. And again, one more time, this right here, this syntax is what you would do for everything that you have on here. But since it's a lot and I don't want to have to pass all of these in a command line, then I'm just going to use this secret as an example. so that I can show you how you're going to do this. But as you can see, the same values, if I drag this over to the right, so the same values that I have for dev, they're the same values that I have for this. That's because I'm obviously using the same values. But in your case, they would be different, or maybe you would just have this in here as placeholders and then you override them with this. Either way, this on the left is going to take priority over everything that we have here. And I'm going to show you this because I'm going to leave this my secret here. And then when I run the application with this configuration, I'm going to change this secret to something else. So whenever I'm going to define the secret, I'm going to pass something else. And then we're going to log it, and you will see that it will be different from my secret. Okay, because I want to show you this in action. So the email configuration, you also have to pass your information here. I'm not going to do that in front of the screen because, you know, that's my username and password. So I'm not going to do that. But the container port you can define, and the app URL, it's going to be the same, but you can pass it in like this. So you make it dynamic so that you don't have to pass a hard-coded string in here like that. And also we need to pass in the host port. If you want, you can pass it in here. So I can say host_port. We're going to keep it at the same, so 8000. So the only thing that we're going to be passing in dynamically to this configuration file, which will be picked up when we run the dev environment, which will look at this configuration to pick these values, then it's going to be whatever we define in here. Okay, so hopefully this is making sense. Maybe not, but once I put it all together, then it's going to make more sense. But for now, just bear with. Okay, so again, one more time, if you were passing in the real world, you would have all of these values set dynamically like this. Okay, or you could do the same in this file. Okay, but in this case, I want to make sure that I can decouple everything. So I'm showing you how you can do it with an environment file and then just passing this environment file to the Docker Compose. Okay, so that's the reason we're doing it like this. Okay, so now what I can do is to just copy this and then close this off, and then go back, create another file. So right click file, gonna say new file, and I can do .env that we want to do maybe test. So .env.test, enter, paste everything, just change this to test. And also we would change all of these values as well. Okay, but you get the idea. And then we're gonna do the last one for prod because we have these 3 different properties file. So I'm gonna right click new, not scratch, I click new file, and then I'm gonna say .env.prod. Paste this information again, and then just change this profile to prod. Obviously in your case, you would change all of these to the prod values, but again, we don't have any real prod. I'm just giving you an example, but that would be what you would do. And also have everything like this because you don't want to pass in your secret or sensitive information in the clear line. Okay, so we're gonna use the dev as an example. So this one right here. And also it's really important that you pass in your email configuration. So these values right here, you can say I have placeholders. So when we come back, I'm not going to show this file anymore because I'm going to pass in these values like here, these values to the application because I'm not passing them dynamically like the last one. Okay, I'm just going to use this as the example, but it's all going to make sense whenever I start running this. Now at this point, we can run the application. Even after when we created the Docker file, this file right here, we could run a command in Docker and then create an image, and then we could run that image as a container. We could do that, but I don't want to do it this way because it's too much work. It's too many commands and you have to make sure you get things the right way. It's just not a very good approach, at least in my opinion. So we're gonna put our own wrapper around all of these commands that we have to run and make it super simple for us. We just run a simple command and it's gonna do exactly what we want it to do. So that's what we're gonna be doing next. So now to the last piece of this, I'm gonna go up again, right click new, do file. This time I'm gonna create a simple shell script. So I'm gonna say start -dev .sh. Okay, so you can already see a pattern here. So if I wanted to start the test one, I would say start -test.sh. I'm gonna press enter, and then I'm gonna pass in the value for the env file. So I'm gonna close this real quick and then open the Docker Compose and then move it to the side like this. So we want to run the command, which is a Docker command, to start this entire process using the Docker Compose. And we know that it's gonna look for the container port and the host port by itself by default, which exists in this .env file. Okay, so by default, Docker will look for any .env file and look for every value that we have for every variable, or in this case, environment variable that we have mentioned inside of this Docker Compose file, which means we don't have to do anything for this .env file when we define the container port and the host port, because those will be picked up just by itself. So we're good on this front. Now we have to pass in this guy right here, which is this env.file. which will be these guys right here, okay? Because that's where we have all of our information, okay? So using the dev as an example, I'm gonna say, well, I want to pass in this file. So I'm gonna say env underscore file. Remember, this is this name that we're defining right here, this env file, okay? It's an environment variable, $ open closing curly braces. So it has to be passed in as we run this command. So I'm gonna say this file is going to be equal, what value we're giving this file is in the same folder, look for a .env .dev. Why dev? Because I named this start-dev.sh. So you would have another one for prod and another one for test. That would be start-prod or start.test.sh. So that's the one we have to pass in here. And the command we're gonna run for the Docker compose is going to be docker-compose. We want to say up because we're building the image. We want to say in detach mode so that the command prompt can come back to us because we don't want it to stay hanging. And then we want to say -- build because we have a Docker file we needed to build, which is what this entire thing is. Okay, so like this part right here. So this is the command, this part that you would use on this Docker file to start it. And that's exactly what we're doing. But the only thing is we also need to pass this environment file, which we're defining here. We say, hey, in the command line, this is the location of that file. Okay, so that's this file right here, which will make sure all of these environment variables are available inside of the Docker container so that when the application is starting, it will say, oh, it's the dev profile that is active. So I need to look for the application.dev. So it's gonna go in here, look for this file. Okay, so this application-dev, and it say, oh, I need to look for all of these environment variables. Well, do I have them? Yes, I have them because they were loaded from this environment file. So it will use all of this information. And this is hard coded. And like I mentioned, they wouldn't be in the real world because you would have to pass these in because you don't want them in the clear like this because they're like secrets and stuff, you know, passwords and things like that. And the only reason I'm doing this is because there's too many of them. I'm just going to give you an example with the secret, which is why I make the secret another environment variable by passing in the $ open and close curly braces, and I just name it secret. Okay, so hopefully this is coming together. And then also in this case, now you would have this file like this, then you would copy this command, close everything, and then go back, create another file. We would name it start. This is made up, so you can define it however you want. That's sh, and then paste that in, and then you see this case, we're looking for the prod, but the rest of the command is going to be the same. And then you would do it one more time, file, we're going to say start-test-sh, and then paste, and then change this to the test, okay, which is defined right here, okay? And that's where you would have all of your test value or key value pairs. Okay, so let's close everything here. So now all we have to do, if I can collapse this, is to run just this file, which is the start.dev.sh, okay, or whatever you want to run for a specific environment, and it will pass in the environment variable and then run the Docker compose command, and that will build your image and then start your container with all of the values that you're passing in. Again, another thing we can do is to pass in this secret. So if I go back to the dev env, we need this secret, this one right here. It has to be passed in as well. So you would do something like this. This is the environment file, and then you could do something like the secret is going to be, you know, my new secret or something. And then you run the command, but we don't want to do this, okay? That's the whole point. We want to do this at runtime so that this is not saving any files. So we're gonna delete it and not do that, but you could if you wanted to. So this is all we have to do for this. And the next thing that I'm gonna do is to show you all of this in action. I know this can be confusing, but this is something that you learn once and then you will have access to all of these files. And then you might have to make some small modifications to them, but as you use it more, it will just make sense, okay? So all we have to do is to run this shell file, and then it will run this command. But before we do that though, we have to pass in the jailability secret, okay? We would have to pass everything here, but again, I'm just taking one example because it's too many. I don't want to have to type all of this in a command line. But you could set them on the host computer. You could get them from some secret manager. Say if you are using AWS, they would make them available as environment variable, okay? And you would pass them with the $ curly braces syntax. All right, so now we're gonna run this file and you will see everything in its glory. So that's what we're gonna be working on next. So I'm now on my Mac computer, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna log into a Linux computer that I have sitting in my room, and that's the one that I use for experiment, and that's where I have Docker installed and Docker Compose installed. So you need to have Docker Compose and Docker installed on your computer so that you can run these commands, because we need Docker as the engine to start everything. So the first thing that I'm gonna do is to go inside of this computer. So I'm gonna SSH into it. I give the nickname of Vostro, so that's just the model of the computer, I think, or part of the model. And then I'm just gonna pass in the password and then go in there. As you can see, it's a simple Linux computer, and I see that I have one update that I can apply, but I'm just gonna ignore it for now. So I already have Docker running on this computer, and I have many different containers running for like personal projects, and I want to make sure that I'm not already using port 8000. So I'm gonna say Docker PS, which is gonna log all of the running containers, and then I also want to just grab just the 8000. So I'm going to say 8000 just to make sure that I don't have anything running on there. So I'm going to press enter. And as you can see, I have one container, which is the OAuth server container. So this is something that I'm using for a microservice course that I'm working on. So this is going to be like the OAuth service or the OAuth server to authenticate the users and authenticate the applications. So what I'm going to do is to just stop that. So I'm going to say Docker stop because I want to run this again. And then I'm going to pass in the name. So I'm going to say OAuth and then tab over. So that should complete the name. And I'm going to press enter. This can take a few seconds to complete. You're just going to go ahead and stop the container because we need to have this port available, not the port inside of the container, because the containers, they run in isolation. So one container is not going to affect another. You can see here, this is inside of the container, but you can see that we're mapping it over to port 8000 on the host. So that's what this means. And we don't want that because the host needs to have this 8000 open for our application. Otherwise it will just fail. So now if I run this command again by just pressing the up arrow key, it should be blank because I stopped that container. So now I'm also going to do an LSD. This is a shorthand command that I created, but I customized LSD to show me just folders when I do LSD. So if I press enter, you can see all the different folders that I have on this computer. And the one that I just copied over is the secure capita. So you can see it right here. So that's the one that we're going to go inside. So we're going to say secure capita and then type it over, complete the name for us. Now we're in there. So now if I do an ls, we can see all the different files that we already had in the application. And the one we're looking for is the dev. Okay, so we're going to start the dev one. So this one right here. So what I can do, I can go inside of this file by just doing v and then start -dev.sh. And you can see this is the file that we have. So you can see start-dev.sh at the bottom, and you can see exactly the command that we put inside of this. So what I'm going to do is to close out of this. And then what I'm going to do is to just do ls-a or l or la. And then I'm going to do start-dev just to see the permission. So you can see I'm the owner of this file. Okay, so you can see the file here. You can see the owner is me. Where am I currently logged in as this user? You can see my name here in the prompt, but I can only read, write. I cannot execute. Everyone else can read. So the group, which is this, the same as my name. So I belong to the group junior row. So I can only read and everybody else can only read. But me as the owner, so the first part of this is read and write. The first dash in the beginning means it's a file. And then these are the three permissions. So read, write, execute for the group, and then read, write, execute for everyone else. So what I want to do is to add the execute permission on this file for me as the owner. A simple way I can do this is to do sudo change mode, so chmode, and then I can say for the user, add the execute permission, and I pass in the name of the file. So I can do start dev.sh, and then I'm going to press enter. It's going to ask me for my password. I'm going to put that in, press enter. And now if I do the same thing again, you'll see now I have read, write, and execute permission because I need to execute this shell file, and everyone else still the same. Okay, so they only have read, they have nothing for write, nothing for execute, so they don't have these permissions. So now what I want to do, if you remember, so if I list everything again, I'm going to show you that we need to pass in the information for the dev. So now if I do v.env.dev, you can see that at the bottom here, we need to pass in this secret. So you can see the secret here is not a hard-coded value. Everything we hard-coded, like I said, we could make them dynamic, but I'm not going to type all of these values in the command line. I'm just going to show you one simple example, and then you can, take it further if you like. So we need to pass in this JITability secret, which is going to be this secret that we're going to pass in here as an environment variable. But I also want to show you this in action so that you can see that it is different from the application. Well, we have to go to source. Oops. So src main resource and then we have the application-dev.yaml, and you can see at the bottom we have this my secure secret. Okay, so I want to show you that it's going to override this value, so I need to kind of like print it somewhere in the application so that we can see it in action. So let's close out of this, and then I'm just going to open V or Vim in the entire folder, so you can see I'm inside of the folder here. So we're just going to open it up, press enter, and it's going to look like this. And I'm just going to say I want to go to source, main, Java, and we want to go to not resource, we want to go to the main files, and we want to go to the providers. So you can see here the providers, oops, so the providers right here, and we want to go to the token provider. I'm going to close this off. I'm going to go down, and you can see right here where we're accessing the secret. So on this line right here, line 48. And what I want to do is to just put some logs. So we know that when we log in, it's going to create an access token. So this function will be called. So here we're going to put sysout. So you can see it's coming up here. And here I'm going to say, well, I can just put something to make it stand out. So I'm going to put a bunch of hash signs, and then I'm just going to duplicate that 2 times. Oops. Okay, and then I'm gonna go in there, and I'm gonna leave the one at the bottom, and then I'm gonna go and change everything inside of here. So I'm gonna do change everything inside, and then I'm gonna say I want to say secret value. So it's gonna print the secret value, or I can say secret value is, and then pass in the value here. So we're gonna put the plus sign and then pass in the secret. So here I can just say secret. Okay, so you can see it coming up here. And I'm gonna save, so that whenever we log in, we'll have proof that we're passing in the value that we actually defining at the time of running the application, and not the value that we already have in the application-dev.yaml file. So I want to prove it to you. Okay, so this is temporary, so obviously you have to remove this. So I'm gonna save and then quit. Now we can run our command. So all we have to do is to define this environment variable. So we're gonna say secret. If you want, you can define it on the host, depending on where the application is running, because it's an environment variable. You can define it like if you're in AWS, you can define it as an environment variable. Like, it's super easy to work with. So here I'm gonna say new secret, yo, or something like that, just so that we know exactly that this is the value that it's getting pulled in. And that would be the case where you would have, for example, like database underscore username or something, and then you would set it equal to something if they're not already defined on the host where this application is running, meaning on that Linux machine, or if they're not available in some file or whatever the case might be. They just wouldn't be defined in your properties file because you don't want them to be defined there. So in our case, we're only doing the secret. So I'm gonna pass in the secret. So, you know, my new secret, yo, and then now we're gonna say that / oops, start.sh. Okay, when we run this is gonna take some time. Okay, we're gonna let it run, but it's gonna take the Dockerfile, build the image, read the appropriate environment file, get all the values, and then start the container, and then the application is gonna be running on 8000. So I'm gonna go ahead and run this, and then we're gonna let it do its thing. So let's go ahead and press enter, and this is gonna kick off. So let's just watch it. Okay, and you can see now it's over, and we didn't get any errors. Everything was build success. As you can see here, we have build success for all of the Maven commands. So now if I do the same command again, so let's go up, we want to do the Docker PS and then look for the 8000 port. So I'm gonna go up. So this is the one. I'm gonna do Control L and then press enter. You can see that it's running, and it's been up 24 seconds ago. We would have no way of knowing if we pass in the secret at runtime, or if it was on the host, it would have been picked up like I mentioned. But now we know that if we try to log in on 8000, the log should say that this is our new secret, yo. So also another thing we can do, we can just check the log. So we can say Docker logs and then pass in the name of the container. So secure copy.container, that should show us that everything was successful. So you can see everything is successful. We don't have any errors, and the application is running on port 8080, which is incorrect because we're passing in 8000. So I think the reason for this is because we forgot to update the .env.dev. So this container port right here, this one right here, which is 8080, this is supposed to be 8000. So I'm going to change this to 8000, and then I'm going to save it, and then I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to do docker rm-f to remove this container. So I'm going to say secret copy.container, and that's just going to remove that container. Now if I do the same command again to see if there's anything running on 8000, you'll see that it's empty. And then now I'm going to do docker image prune. That's going to remove any dangling image. As you can see here, here. So get rid of all these images that we don't need, and then we're gonna run that command one more time. So that's the command, you know, my new secret yo. I'm just gonna make this 2, my new secret yo 2222, so that you know that this is the new one, and then press enter again. Okay, looks like it's done again. Gonna clear the screen, and now I'm gonna do docker logs secure capita. You can see now it's running on 8000, okay, because this is what we specify in the .env.dev file. So now if I do the same command again, so docker ps grep the 8000, you can see we have 8000 on the container pointing to 8000 on the Linux machine that I'm using, okay, which is this machine. So now I'm gonna clear and do host name and then -i so that I can see the IP address, and we can either use this first one or the second one here. These are related to Docker, so just ignore these, but we're only focusing on that first one and the second one. So let's go ahead and grab Postman. I'm gonna drag it over here, and we need to change this to this new IP address, so 192.168.1.216, and I'm just gonna make this full screen. So we want to send the request with the same user because we're using the same database, so junior@gmail.com, and then 123456. Hopefully I still have this user, and then we're pointing to 8000 to this. Okay, so another thing I'm gonna do is to make sure that we can see the logs. So I'm going to clear this and do docker logs and then do secure capita, but this time we're going to do -f so that we can follow it so that it can be live. Okay, so you can see that the command is stuck with this log. So everything that happens, we'll be able to see it. So now I'm going to go ahead and click login, and I see nothing happens because I have a typo here. So 168.1.216. I was missing a dot here, and I'm going to send login again. You can see it's going through. Also, you got to make sure that the port is open on the host though, otherwise it will not work. And you can see I have bad credentials. So the application is running fine, but I get bad credentials. If I check the log, you can see all the logs that happen. We get bad credentials because I see that I have a typo here. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I have an extra 2 in here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then we're gonna send it, give it a second, and there we go. So you can see login success, and then here's the refresh token, here's the access token. This is running on my local computer, but you can get any computer in the cloud, like any server in the cloud from AWS or any other cloud provider. You just have like a simple server, and then install Docker and Docker Compose, and you can just run this command. Like you can literally build your application that way. Just make sure that the host that you're using is very secure so that nobody can access it. So you can see now everything is running as expected, and I get, you know, all the information for the application. So now if you look at the log again, if I go back, you can see the secret value is new secret yo, and it has 22222. So the value that we passed in at runtime is the value that was used to create the secret. And then remember, I just gave you guys one example with the secret because I don't want to pass in all these values for the database and all this stuff when I'm running the command. But another thing you can do is to set them on the host as environment variable, and Spring will pick them up as well as you run the application. So you can see how you can do this in the way that is very secure, which is just passing it in. Sometimes they have files where they point to, like we have, you know, the .env file that they have. Then after a command is run, then they just delete the file. Like there's a command that says, hey, run this command, pass in these values, pass in this properties file, and then after that, delete the file because they don't want this to be hanging around, like username and password and things like that. So you can clearly see once we log in, we're actually seeing that the secret that was used is the secret that we passed in. So I wanted to show you this. So there's more setup that you can do and condense things a lot more. Hopefully that was helpful to you, and definitely take a look at this configuration because it's going to take some getting used to so that you can really understand how they relate to each other and what takes priority over what, because depending on what you have, it can override another value. As you can see here, we have this properties file. So if I do Control-C here and I list everything, so we have, well, I have to go and list everything in the source. Oops, I need to do src main resource. So if I list everything here, you can see we have these values inside of of these properties file, but they're being overridden. So there's an order as to what takes priority over what. So that's something that you also have to know. And this might be overkill for some people. They just might want to run a simple Docker. Like they don't care if their password is in the open. They just want to run the application using Docker on their local computer. They don't want to do all this setup. And that's totally okay. That's what I did like for the majority of the time. And I have tutorials for free online that you can check out. They should be on YouTube. So you should see how I do it when I don't have to do all this setup and pass in secret and whatever else that you want to pass that you don't want people to see. So you don't have to do it that way. But in case you wanted to, let's say, you know, you want to be really cheap and you want to just get, I don't know, maybe like 5 servers from AWS or some other cloud provider, and then you want to do your own setup because, you know, your application is not that big and the only thing you really care about is the database. So you might really want to have like a secure database where you have all of your data, which is like one of the most important things with companies these days. It's the data that they have that's like really important for them. So that would be a good example for you to make your application secure so that you don't have username and password and secret hanging around. And then you can build your application. You have a nice UI. And let's say, I don't know, you have like 3,000 or 5,000 customers that are using your application and generating income for you. And who knows, you can become a millionaire depending on the product that you're selling. And you didn't even have to have, you know, a whole AWS or cloud system where you're paying thousands of dollars to these big companies. You just really just get your own server using Docker, which is free. And then you can set up your own application. The only thing, like I would say, that you would really have to be careful with is your data. So you would have to buy some secure database management system from one of these cloud providers, because I wouldn't advise you to get your own database and then manage it yourself. Because with these cloud providers, you can have replicas and other things. Like if your data can be lost, like it's really hard to lose your data, which is like really important for your company. But this setup, in case you want to do that, this setup should help you in making sure that secrets are secrets and you're not passing in sensitive information in the clear when you're running your application. If you wanted to use, you know, more services from cloud providers, they have like a bunch of services that you can use to achieve the same thing, and it's even more secure, I would say. But in case you don't want to do that, you don't have that big of a company, then you can use this setup. And if you don't want to do that at all, you just want to know how you can run your Docker containers, and then you don't have to worry about this, you're just doing some experiment, then check out my YouTube channel. You should see a similar example, like almost the same, just not with as many configuration files. The username and the password are passed in directly into the file. So hopefully that was useful to you. This is the end of this section, and the next thing that I'm gonna do is to deploy the application using a CDCI pipeline on AWS. And this is gonna be like a very specific setup. So I just want to give you an idea, because I know AWS is very popular, but it's gonna be different for every company because they might be using something else. But at least it will give you an idea in case you want to build your own CDCI pipeline for whatever reason. Make sure you get the source code for this. Any questions, let me know. The best way to do this is using Discord, because I have the app on my phone. And then after that, we're gonna deploy the application, but this time it's gonna be using a CDCI pipeline, which is gonna be pretty cool. So that's what we're gonna be working on next.